Hello, welcome. God bless you, obviously. Yeah, we're going to look at another lady in a series of Christian women that we've been looking at. The others being Corrie ten Boom, Katharina Luther. Gosh, can't remember the other one. How awful. I can see her in my mind's eye. Either way, ladies in Christianity, as it were. So I'll be able to see the live chat, and I'm going to, as you may know, if you've seen the screen grab and the title of the vid, it's I'm not sure of the pronunciation, to be fair. So Teresa of Avila. There's only one L. Avila. And her life spanned from 1515 to 1582. And as you may have seen from the title, her full name anyway, let's butcher it as it were, Teresa de Cepeda y Ahumada. Okay, so however her friends pronounced that, she had a liking for nice clothing. Her fashion sense aesthetically went well with her outgoing and vivacious personality. Whilst she was still a young woman, she had the most decadent jewellery, fabrics, stone-studded earrings, massive brooches, which I'm sure were in fashion, ostentatious rings, silks, lace, that kind of shebang. She had always her hair in the latest style, and she wore perfume, and she often spent her evenings on the town, as we would call it, with friends, suitors, dancing, partying, basically. She was quite temperamental, it's reported, and she was equally effusive, bubbly, outgoing. And I guess those two qualities of hers depended somewhat on what time of the day it was. She loved to laugh, which is one of my things when I can. She was frivolous. She liked to gossip. She liked to entertain and to be entertained. She liked music. She had a penchant, I guess, for fine cuisine and what we can term, I guess, colloquially, the good life. There is a time for penance and a time for partridge, she once quipped. And essentially, she appreciated and craved attention. And that's handy because she was often at the center of it. So, that seems pretty radically different from the perception, if any, that you may hold of Teresa of Avila. Like Carmelite nun, theologian, saint, all of those things. Whereas in her younger days, she was materialistic, she was pretty vain, she was potentially, being described as shallow, could have been levelled at her as an accusation. She was certainly bold, even then. But these two, as it were most certainly one and the same lady. And if we look at our own lives before Christ, maybe, we're able to, sorry, I'm just looking at the chat, we're able to recognise in ourselves some pretty radical changes. So the question is, how did she go from basically it girl, like a socialite, a fashionista? How did she become, what was the road towards, sainthood? So again, I'm going to have to read her name. Oh my gosh. Teresa de Cepeda y Ahumada, maybe. 1515, as I said, was her year of birth. She was born in, I'm so sorry, Spanish people, I'm so sorry, in Gotarendura in Spain, or España. See, I do know. She was the daughter of Alonso Sanchez de Cepeda and his second wife, who was, the anglicised version is certainly Beatrice, but there's a Z at the end. She wasn't an only child by any stretch of the imagination. She was one of 12. However, she was born into a wealthy and prestigious family. They lived, she also, in like a massive sprawling compound, basically, which had numerous servants. Her home was filled with fine tapestries, Flemish tapestries, elaborate gardens. They also enjoyed, fine carpets, chandeliers, stately home furniture, that kind of setup. And although she was, as I said, she had an inclination for frivolity, she did, as a young girl, also have a deeper, more somber, potentially troubled side to her. And when she was 7, she took on the pages and the reading of Flos Sanctorum, which was like a miniature library, I guess, a collection, a popularized collection of stories about martyrs and saints. And she decided it would be more expeditious to martyr herself and go immediately to heaven than to live out her entire life, full stop. Like, she just went, yep, that's the one. And on the basis of this, it doesn't say what she thought about sainthood, as in maybe devoting her life to the church. But once she decided she would rather martyr herself than, live her life to potentially its natural conclusion many, many years hence, she convinced her older brother to run away with her to the moors. And when they arrived, she planned to proclaim her Christianity. Sorry, something's beeping, but that shouldn't. Sorry about that. You think you've silenced one, and then okay, nobody else is going to call that back. Right. So yeah, she wanted to get there, proclaim her Christianity, and this is what she was hoping, nutter, be beheaded for it, and therefore get a do not pass go. Go directly to heaven, as it were. So she and her brother crept out of their home and their grounds at dawn and got about as far as the portals to the city before their uncle arrived on horseback and took them home, to not put too fine a point on it. Her mother died in childbirth, and at that time, Teresa was a young teenager, and she decided to the hands of the Virgin Mary and would prostrate herself before Mary's statue and beg Mary, in essence, to fill this massive void, this gap that her mother's absence had, opened up within her life. And this veneration of hers would continue with her through her life. But at this point, it didn't take her away at all from her love of, the enjoyment of life, as it were, the frivolity and all the things I mentioned. If anything, as is so often the case, to be honest, the bereavement of took her, or made it easier for her to get to the brink of all of the, I won't say malpractices, but all of the things she was doing which were not venerating anybody, kind of thing. So her father, at this stage, or as he watched this stuff, unfold, became pretty adamant and convinced that her honour was at stake, and he therefore sent her packing, basically, to an Augustinian convent, which was close to their home. And this convent ran a finishing school, which obviously prepared those young ladies who lived there for, I guess, a domestically devout life. And at Santa Maria de Gracia, Teresa, portrayed the manner of a young lady who was pious. However, on the inside, she still struggled to, cast out, you could say, the demons that hung around and tormented her. In essence, she didn't want to be a nun. It hadn't been her choice, obviously, to go off to the convent, and she worried that she wasn't suitable, for like a spiritual commitment of this magnitude, which it certainly is. And she watched the older nuns and noted the passion that they displayed, like the dedication they had, their obvious love of God and devotion to their calling. She didn't, by comparison or even without that, she didn't feel any of the things that she observed. They would maybe cry when praying. She didn't. And she was disturbed somewhat by her lack of connection or obvious connection, like emotionally, to God. And this is a quote. It says, she was a hard praying, dry-eyed realist. That's from her biographer, Kathleen Medwick. And another quote, with, it seemed, very little to offer God. That's certainly true of all of us, really. But either way, she was worried that if she went into the convent, as in, officially, if she became a novitiate and continued to what she thought of as fail at her prayers, she's already at 7 decided that like a full-time life, as it were, seemed like a long stretch. But at the thought of, failing to be an adequate nun, she just thought that her days would just, stretch on interminably and propel her into, or make more evident, an endless spiritual wasteland. And somewhat ironically, she was rescued. She was set free from this by an illness that was the first of many, many afflictions. She was forced to leave the convent and began convalescence at the home of her uncle. And it's here that she began to engage in long conversations with her uncle, theological conversations. And she says, I began to grasp that truth which I had heard as a child, that all is nothing and that the world is vanity and on the verge of ending, she wrote. And I began to be afraid that if I had died right then, I would have gone to hell, even though I couldn't make myself want to become a nun. I saw that was the best and safest thing to do, and so little by little I decided to bully myself into doing it. In a nutshell, she became a nun because she was less terrified of that prospect than of actually being condemned, to damnation, as it were. So now we skip forward somewhat to 1535. And anyone who's Europe at this time was certainly in upheaval theologically. The Reformation had occurred not too long before this, or was, in its infancy. And in 1535, she entered into la Encarnacion, I don't know, because I'm just so not Spanish and there's no little squiggles. So this is a convent anyway in Avila, where she stayed there for 26 years. And as an order of nuns, the one that she chose, not coincidentally, was a lot was significantly less demanding than the Augustinian convent, which she'd spent some time in. So there is a Renaissance scholar called Theodore Rab, and he says this: this may indicate how gradually she moved from worldliness to the austerity for which she would eventually be known. And at l'Incarnation, Teresa, she had a 2-level suite. She had fine furniture. She had her own kitchen. She was allowed to entertain outsiders, relatives, friends, and was even encouraged to leave the convent, as it were, temporarily, when she needed to. She was referred to as Donna Teresa, which was like a nod towards her social standing, which they were obviously well aware of. And during her 30s now, she continued to suffer from ever increasingly worse bouts of illness, episodes of fainting, fevers, visions, which is going to be significant. And she interpreted that as a reprimand for her sins from God. So as she grew into her role within the convent as a nun, with relative ease, she still battled against, unsurprisingly, I mean, like she's not made of stone, with temptation of the kind that she was used to before, like just worldly distraction and frippery. So she says, all the things of God gave me great pleasure, yet I was tied and bound to those of the world. And she wrote that years later. So although I doubt she was pleased to include that, these recountings of these battles that she underwent. She had a 20-year battle. She wrote these in Vida, which was her autobiography, her spiritual autobiography. And she spoke at length on her struggles, her personal struggles, as a testimony to God's resilient, it's a lovely way to put it, forgiveness and pursuit of even the most persistent sinners, which she obviously was referring to herself. So now she's coming up to her 40th birthday, and she began to experience relief at last from the strife that she attributed, she believed it to be spiritual in origin. And she did this, it was alleviated by a new way of praying that she adopted, which fostered within her a more edifying sense of communion with God. And the visions would become known as her raptures. And one of these, the most famous of these, is portrayed by a sculptor, an Italian named Gian Lorenzo Bernini, and it's called The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa in Rome. In his hands, I saw a long golden spear, and at the end of the iron tip, I seemed to see a point of fire. And this is what she wrote about the angel who had visited her in a vision during this rapture. Not the rapture, this rapture. With this, he seemed to pierce my heart several times so that it reached my entrails. When he drew it out, I thought he was drawing them out with it. And he left me completely afire with a great love of God. That's nice. However, like I said, the prevailing mayhem of the time caused maybe it wasn't this that was the cause, but it certainly exacerbated the feelings of certain church officials who suspected, they didn't disbelieve in her raptures, as we're going to continue calling them, but attributed them to Satan, as one does. Or worse, that she was, attempting to commune directly with God, which they apparently felt was just not on. So following the birth, as it were, of the Protestant Reformation, which was certainly around 1521. It kind of dragged out a little bit. Yeah, the Roman Catholic Church, the RC, yeah, they weren't having a bar of it. They were suspicious of even the most, like just anything slightly unorthodox to their way of thinking. I don't mean like Orthodox Christianity, but yeah, they didn't know quite what to do because obviously she was a nun, and they didn't know what to do with a nun whose visions gave her apparent direct contact with God. At this point, by this point even, Teresa had renounced her worldly name, her secular name, and she had embraced the name, I'm just going to pronounce it in the anglicized version, Teresa de Jesus, de Jesus even. Whatever. And still, even obviously she didn't do it for any reason other than she felt called to, but she still faced resistance from the church and the Inquisition. Like, really, it's not Monty Python. And that was until she finally died in 1582. So, several years after she entered Encarnacion, however it's going to be pronounced, or however it should be, she began to hear a new message and a new direction from God. So she realized that even though she devoted herself to the Lord, she hadn't eschewed or renounced or relinquished her comfortable existence, which was the result of her social standing. So due to this fact, she began to contemplate ways or, the possibility of a more austere existence, a stricter way of living for herself and for her nuns. And these included, unsurprisingly for a nun, a vow of poverty. And God apparently agreed with her. She felt encouraged in this to develop a new convent, and she herself believed that God even gave her the name for it, which was San Jose. So, if we compare, the first convent to the second, that was a massive difference. But now this departure from La Encarnacion to San Jose was like a dramatic, and it was even more dramatic if we consider the life that she led before any of the convents, the Augustinian, any of them. As I said at the top, she liked to live well, and she certainly did. But now that she had founded this convent, I was going to say order, but I'm not certain that I don't know where she veered in terms of naming nomenclature even. However, let me get back to the point. Instead of these fine silks and laces and fabrics and fancy jewelry and perfume and all of that stuff, she now basically wore a threadbare habit, and this was made of coarse wool, not comfortable soft wool. She would walk barefoot, and this was not just like in the courtyard, this was over rocky terrain, which was where she was. And instead of the fine food and the wine and the elaborate place settings and chandeliers and all of the stuff that she enjoyed at her home, she abstained now from red meat, and she only ate bread, cheese, fruit and vegetables. So, and these were cultivated on site within the garden at the convent. And now she forsook gossip and socialization and any form of being a socialite whatsoever. She basically there was either prayer or silence. And within all of these seeming hardships, she was the happiest that she'd been. And she describes these 5 years at San Jose as the most tranquil that she had ever experienced within her life. On top of this, on top of the physical hardship, I mean, walking around in the rocky terrain just with no shoes on is it's very difficult, I guess. Within this, the hardships that she endured in this reformed, convent life, whilst dealing, let's not forget, with health mini crises that still continued to worsen, she also faced massive amounts of obstacles in the founding of subsequent convents that she attempted and went on to do. And this process for her never was anything other than an uphill battle, in which she had to engage in political negotiation, or business. She had to have some finesse and astute interpretation of the events and know how to counter these problems. She needed and displayed stamina, unwavering stamina, courage, and more so an obedience to what she perceived as, to obedience to God's will in the face of what seemed like ever-increasing, insurmountable obstacles. I'm not sure that I'd describe them like that when I feel like that. But yeah, the first mass that was held at San Jose, when the bells rang, for instance, as one of these problems, the people of the town rioted, as you do, closed the shops, stormed the convent in an attempt to cause the nuns to become terrified and flee the scene, as it were. And church officials still doubted her divine visions and insisted, to the contrary, that she was possessed by Satan. Jesus was also accused of doing things by the power of, I think, demons. Maybe Satan himself. Just throwing it out there. The Inquisition, literally nobody expects a Spanish Inquisition. I had to say it. But the Inquisition itself, as it were, came to her and her convents more than once. And all joking aside, this is, that wasn't a pleasant day's work. I'm confident. They demanded to inspect documents. They threatened her with hell, i.e. excommunication. They also threatened her with the imprisonment of her body, to go to jail. And in 1576, she was retired off. She was forced into retirement. We'll put that like a retirement. And this was at St. Joseph's Convent in Toledo. And it was after 3 years of basic imprisonment and several letters to Philip II of Spain, who was the monarch at the time, pleading by her that the investigation of, both her and other reformers was finally shelved, as it were, just dropped. Despite these, seemingly insurmountable, definitely overwhelming, come off it. She started off pretty comfortable and a bit snazzy, and now she's taking on the entire church, as it were, or she's being what's the word? Not really well, yeah, I guess that she's being treated as if she's an outsider, as opposed to someone who's devoted her life to that same, the same God that we all worship. Anyway, despite all of this, she eventually went on to found 16 convents, bless her, right across Spain, and that was before she died. All of them were in the barefoot discast. Yeah, that's the other word. The barefoot Carmelite order. And they all adhered to the 4 principles which she herself established, which were like a prerequisite for a vow of poverty, a renunciation of property, a disavowing, I guess, of social or class distinction, and enclosure, i.e., all outside worldly contact was severed. Also obedience. Just throw it out there because the rest seems redundant without it. So when she wasn't off traveling, like establishing convents across the countryside of Spain, and then carrying on visiting them and upkeeping them, and what headache, like, I guess just all the admin and the I don't know, it's not like they were being assisted greatly by other members of the body of Christ, as it were. Negotiating for funds, dealing with church leaders, potentially scaring off rioters. I think that only happened once. Trying to get permission to start the next one. She often confined herself to the solitude of her cell in order to write. And those who were her superiors required her to keep a record, an account of her spiritual journey, which, I mean, is a blessing, like in a Romans 8:28, when whatever the motivations were, what a brilliant legacy. So most of the things that are known of her today, her visions, her business dealings, her prayer life, her thoughts, her justifications for her, conclusions within her beliefs, come from her autobiographical work, which is called the Vida, Vida, a spiritual autobiography also. She wrote it herself, obviously. She didn't have a ghostwriter. She edited it. She updated it over a period that spanned several years. So the Vida and the Foundations, which was a book concerned with the establishment of the convents, are both largely practical. And her later work, and the one that may be most widely associated with her, called The Interior Castle, that was kind of her labour of love, as it were. So she considered this, The Interior Castle, as a direct result of divine intervention. Those others of the sisters who witnessed her writing, they later noted that at her canonization hearings, she often wrote with her eyes not observing what she was writing, but raised up towards heaven. So within the middle of this pretty busy, demanding, hectic, multitasking, overwhelming, difficult to some extent life, she loved and appreciated the time that she was able to spend alone with God, and yearned for more of it. She says, "I never have peace and quiet for writing and have to work in snatches. I wish I had more time, because when the Lord inspires me, everything gets said much more easily and in a much better way. Then it's like doing a piece of embroidery with the pattern right in front of you." I can attest to that. So, there have been numerous biographies, essays, articles written about Teresa, and these attest to the legacy, her legacy as a heroine of our faith. So, it's like a minimum 4 centuries since she's passed away, and she continues to be considered and applauded as a courageous reformer, a relentless reformer, a saint, theologian, mystic, and author. Beyond the convents and beyond those words that she wrote, she is certainly an example for not just Christian women, but Christians, full stop. There's something about the simplicity and the like understanding that she displayed within the like furore, like the madness, basically. Because she wasn't like I often used to fall into the trap of thinking that people like of certain eras, I don't mean like really like Bronze Age or anything, like far into the distant past, but even so, like I had considered them to be, because they didn't have the technology that we have and the information at their fingertips and the like advances in industry and all of that stuff, as I don't know, like less intelligent, I guess. And then you just have to read Aquinas or like the church fathers, and you're like, oh my God, not so much. And in another respect, she wasn't much different in that the world called to her and satisfied her for some time. Like, and it directly impinged upon initially the direction that I don't mean when she ran away from home, but that her life ought to take. Because of this like inner conflict, something that I need to be better. Like she didn't turn to anyone other than God in desperation. Fair enough. That's where we all get before we think, oh yeah. Well, I don't know about all, me. She gradually began to not only listen to him, because that's just so important. You can put your little heart into prayers and really like earnestly meant. Sometimes you feel the Spirit moving in you, like there's times when I have to kind of try and keep up with my own prayers because they just seem to be flowing, but you have to listen. You have to listen out for the answer, otherwise it's just like a out of office reply, like you just get on with the next task in your life, and you don't. I feel like it's a skill. It's not something that's innate. It's to listen out and to see where God, like, I can't speak for him. Like with me, he impresses things upon me, and certainly I have times when I feel like fully formed ideas are just slotted into my mind, like they just trickle down, and then like I've had times where I've had to quite quickly. It'll be when I'm relaxed, usually if I'm in the bath or something, where I have to get a pen and paper and write down what's literally being spoken in my mind before I forget the words. And that's kind of what she was saying when she said those times when she feels inspired. Obviously, it makes it like you're just you're working from an embroidery pattern. You're just following like what's already in front of you, ostensibly. So also with the listening, she then slowly learned, as we've seen, to put these things into practice, to be obedient to what was revealed to her. And she did struggle, with the same temptations, the same sins that we all, I guess, struggle with. And she may have been, to a certain degree, overly critical. It's not uncommon. And frustrated with her own, what she perceived as her shortcomings. In spite of this, in spite of the, I was going to say real life. I mean, like alongside the outer, self and life with her. Like, she persevered. That's one thing that certainly she did in prayer, especially because you remember she had that feeling that, or I don't do it as well as these Augustinian nuns. Like it has no meaning for me, in as much as when she compared herself to them, she thought like, it's not like that for me. Yeah, it didn't initially come easy to her, to say the least. And yet practice, persistence, devotion enabled her to connect with God, like in an ever more progressively deeper nature. And when she finally, I guess, after all this time trying, when she finally heard his voice amid, remember, like all the madness that was going on and was about to come on, she did listen. And his part of the transaction, God's part, was that he did like transform her, like from an it girl, like I said at the top, to a hugely influential and inspirational example of a woman of God, or just a Christian, like if you want to put it that way. She started off distracted by the world, and she ended up, to all intents and purposes, changing it.